Okay. Well, it's since we're talking about forgiveness, we're learning that, Stephen forgave everyone who was stoning him, and wrongfully, just like Jesus asked for forgiveness for just like Jesus had asked for forgiveness for everyone who was, um, for like everyone who allowed him to be crucified when he was, being crucified. Well, I have a question for you. Since God helps us forgive our enemies, how can we forgive someone who's still hurting us? We'll talk more about that. But first, let me tell you a story. There was a lady named Rochelle Friedman, and she was hanging out with her friends at a pool when one of her friends playfully pushed her into the shallow end of the swimming pool. Now, when Rachel fell in, she hit her head on the bottom of the pool and it broke her neck. And as a result of being pushed, Rochelle has became paralyzed from the neck down ever since. Now, Rochelle forgave her friend for pushing her in, saying, I love her and I have no grudge. A grudge is like a bitterness or really, really like strong feeling of anger that you hold against someone. Now, do you think you could really and truly forgive a friend who did that? Miss Jenny, do you think you would be able to forgive someone? Say if you were Rochelle, would you be able to forgive someone, your friend who pushed you into the pool?
I think in time, yes, because it wasn't done intentionally. It was an accident. Um, they were all playing around, and I think, yeah, in time.
Now, how would it be different if the person who pushed you in was not your friend?
Like someone I didn't know.
Yeah, like if someone you didn't know, just some random person came up and decided they wanted to play a prank and push you into the shallow end.
That would be extremely hard to forgive.
It
I
would
would be,
be.
Yeah,
That would be really hard. But I think again in time, because hanging
yeah,
on to that anger and that bitterness would just make me, and this is just myself, like I just like it makes me a cranky person when I hold on to anger and bitterness.
yeah. Too.
yeah,
I think it'd be really hard because we would have to, like, on Wednesday's lesson, I would probably be thinking, what is my purpose now?
Mhm.
But because you don't have the use of your limbs doesn't mean you don't have a purpose. So I would have to try and grapple with that and accept that and try and ask God, what is my purpose now? Clearly,
yeah,
I have to kill me, but I'm also limited. But that just means that we have to, God's going to use me in a different way to think outside the box and use me in a different way.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, all of them are true, it would be hard to forgive someone who wasn't your friend and just like some random person come in and thought they would be funny and as a result left you paralyzed. But God helps us forgive our enemies. Okay. So let's say, let's think of something that we need to forgive, something that has happened to us in the past that we would like to forgive, you know, have a balloon and I'm going to blow into it. And while I'm blowing into it, I'm going to think of something in the past. that has happened that I know I would need to forgive. Let's see. One of the many random things. Let's see. I am going to forgive my daughter for not doing her homework for the past 2 weeks. You see that? All that air that was in there, that was all the anger that was in the balloon. And when I decided to forgive, it all left. Our balloon is here to remind us that, whenever we think of something that really that hurts us, it's like it's in the balloon. It's filling us up with all this anger, maybe a lot of hurt feelings. But once we decide to forgive, we just let all those feelings go and we're free. Now, what was it like letting our balloons, when you do this at home, think about what it's like to let our balloons fill up when you're thinking of something, maybe a wrong that has happened to you and you fill it up. What is it like to think about forgiveness and letting that go, letting those emotions go? Well, I know for myself, it feels good. For everyone, when we let go of those hurt feelings, we feel free and we feel happy and we feel much better. Now, it's one thing to forgive someone like Rochelle did, but what about when someone keeps hurting us? What if our balloons keep getting filled back up with another thing to forgive? Well, in the Bible, Stephen's enemies were still throwing stones. And when he prayed for them to be forgiven, it, I guess, if we were in, well, if I was in that position, it would be difficult for me. But, Stephen was showing us, that we should forgive, just like Jesus. Now, how can we forgive people when they're still hurting us? Well, you keep asking that question. Let's figure out how. Now, our balloons represent someone who was a person hurting our feelings over and over and over again. Is there a limit to how much you have to forgive a person? Well, I know there's a limit to how much air could be put into a balloon, but let's read what the Bible says. Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 22 says, Then Peter came to him and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times. 7. So 70 times 7. Now, what do you think Jesus meant by 70 times 7? Is that like the exact number that we should forgive people? Or did he mean something else? Well, some people who study the Bible think that the religious leaders back then, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees of that time, thought that you only have to forgive a person 3 times. Okay. So if someone were to hurt you once, twice, or 3 times, that's the limit. 3 times. You are only supposed to forgive a person 3 times. So when Peter asks the question, it sounded like um, he was being generous compared to the law. He was asking Jesus, should we forgive someone 7 times instead of 3? Well, 3 and 7 are both easy numbers to count and keep a track of. But times, the number of times in Jesus's answer was so big that he made the point that we shouldn't count how many times we should forgive someone. He helps us to keep forgiving others. But what if the person we're forgiving is someone who doesn't like you and they're mean to you or they're mean to us? Well, Jesus talked about that too. Let's listen to hear what he has to say in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 through 47. It says, "You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor." Oh, I really love this. And this really explains it. You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you are kind only to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. So here it shows us that Jesus is telling us that we should continue to forgive. You know, there's many people who have a limit, but we should be like, we should be loving to everyone and continue to forgive just like Jesus has taught us. Now, what's something you could show someone who doesn't like you? What's an act of love, or what's something you could do to show someone love who doesn't like you? Um, can you think of something, Miss Amber or Miss Jenny? Sorry to put you on the spot. What would be something you could do to show someone doesn't, who is not your friend, that you love them?
I'd say just simple, basic respect. If you can just on a basic level understand that you're both human and you're both have the right to live, whether you agree or disagree or like each other or not, you both still deserve to be alive, and you both still deserve to be treated as a human and respect each other's boundaries. So that's one way to just show love. Even you ain't got to be super cuddly or be like send them cards or anything like that. Just sometimes just being able to accept that some people just don't like you, and you're not going to agree on things, but that doesn't mean you have to be mean to each other or think that you're better than them and put them down. So just having basic respect is a way of loving everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, I love cuddles. So if I could, I would try to show, but
Yes,
that's true. Giving them their space is good. It's a good way to show someone an act of love. Miss Jenny, what would you do to show your love to someone who is not your friend?
I think
It's,
it basically what Miss Amber said is just having a respect that, we're both humans and we both have to be in the same place or whatever the case may be. Maybe we're in the same class. Doesn't mean that I have to talk to you every day, but it does mean that, I will show you respect. And, if you say hi to me, obviously I'm going to say hi back. Or if we're put together working on a project or something, then I'm going to be nice to you and things like that. But I think it's just a general common courtesy of just treating people like they're people, and not just because you don't like someone doesn't mean that you have to treat them like they're not human beings, because we're all humans and we're all people and we all have feelings, and my actions because I don't like you may hurt you, and I would never be okay if I was hurting someone. So
Yeah.
just a general respect, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with both of you. And sometimes as an adult, I kind of tend to think that being an adult is like being in like a grown-up high school, I guess. Still, we're still in high school, but as adults now. And sometimes that can be hard, you know? Sometimes if someone hurts us, it's okay to stop spending time with that person sometimes. He or she may not be a good person to be around, like someone who keeps, who just doesn't like to get along with you. Sometimes it's okay to just, keep your distance. But we can always pray for that person to experience Jesus's love and eventually come around. But sometimes our enemies hurt us because they themselves have been hurt by someone else and they need love too. So even if we need to stay away from certain people, we can still show love by praying for them and not saying mean things behind their back. Now, let's read more about loving people who aren't treating us well in Romans chapter 12, verse 18. It says, do all that you can to live in peace with everyone. So, what does it mean by do all that you can? And where does it end? Well, that's something that we would have to answer for ourselves because everyone's different. We all have, our own ways of doing things. For example, Miss Jenny, I'm going to put you back on the spot again. In this grown-up high school that we're living in, what would be all that you can? What would you do? How would you do all that you can to live in peace with everyone?
I think what I'm doing now, I don't like confrontation. I'm not a big confrontation person, and both of you know that. So I do tend to shy away from confrontation. So if somebody's upset with me, it bothers me. So I'll apologize and then just kind of move on a little bit, because I can't control what somebody else is feeling, or I can't control what somebody else is going to do. I can only control myself. And I think that's how I kind of keep the peace between everybody. And I'm a people watcher. I like to know people. So I learn people's habits and behaviors, and know things that make them happy, things that make them sad. And I either try to give more of the things that make them happy, or not do the things that make them upset or sad or angry. But also with that understanding of, not everybody's going to like me. I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and that has to be okay. And that took a long time for me to understand and to get, is that I'm not everybody's going to like me. I used to be if somebody didn't like me, I had to like find a way to make them like me. But that can't be a thing, because not everybody's going to like you. So it's kind of, I am who I am, and I'm not going to pretend to be anybody else. And I think that kind of keeps the peace. And then with that, the same thought of, you know what, okay, you don't like me, but I'm still going to respect you, and you're still a human being, and we either still have to work together, or we still have to be in the same room, or whatever the case may be. So there are people in my life that I don't get along with, but they're still important in my life, and I still try and do things for them to make them happy. They don't always appreciate it, but okay.
Yeah, that's a good way. How about you, Miss Amber? What would be all that you can? What would you do? How would you do all that you can to live in peace with everyone around you?
Mine definitely I always have to try and keep in the back of my mind the WWJD. What would Jesus do? I know I don't always choose what I know Jesus would do. I'm like this Jenny. I mean, I don't go seeking out fights or anything like that, but if somebody has a problem with me, I'm gonna be like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but if I feel like I don't agree with you, you're not going to force me into what you're thinking, and I'll fight you tooth and nail on that part. And, you know, you can't push me into that. I try not to push people into things that aren't for them and stuff like that. So I try and be respectful of people's boundaries, try and meet the needs of people that have needs. If not, try and help them figure out who can meet their needs. Try and talk to people. Stand up for people that need to be stood up for, things like that. So I just kind of try and make sure that everybody has what they need in whatever way I can provide it. And the way for me to do that, to keep the peace for them, is to have God help keep the peace in me. Because if I don't have him leading me and always knowing that he's there and knowing like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this need, because this is something that I can't do, God help me. You know, that's what him keeping the peace in me helps me meet the needs of the others to keep the peace with them.
Yeah. That's a really good way of doing all that we can to keep the peace around us with everyone. Me, I gotta say, growing up and even now, but I'm a confrontational kind of person. If someone like keeps pushing my buttons, then it pushes me to the limit where I'm like, hey, if you don't stop, I'm gonna go ahead and do something about it. But it's been really hard for me to kind of let those feelings go. And I'm learning that instead of being in people's face and telling them, hey, you know what, you need to back off, you need to stop doing that. Um, I've been learning that I just need to learn to try to understand the person, where they're coming from, why they are doing that, and try to compromise and just let things go. Try to get along and just let things go. Just let it, like, I guess, like my mom would normally tell me when I would get heated, just let it go over my head, and just let it be. And if we can't compromise, I usually become reserved. Um, and I'll say hi, show respect towards the person, say hi, and just try to keep the peace, try to get along. We may not agree on everything, we may not get along all the time. And when I start feeling like, you know, those feelings are coming in, I just try to shy away and say, okay, well, have a nice day. I got to go and do something. So for me, it's been a really huge learning curve from being a confrontational kind of person to more of a passive kind of person. And sometimes we can do everything we can to live in peace and still have people who don't like us.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just are going to be mean, and God helps us forgive our enemies. And this is one, and what we were talking about, myself, Miss Jenny, and Miss Amber, the ways that we deal with those kinds of situations is one way to keep the peace around in the situations or around us. We all have our own ways to try to keep the peace, and we should learn how to keep it, because forgiving is hard sometimes. And it's important to forgive others because God has forgiven us over and over and over again. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32 says, "Instead, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you." And this question is just for us, just for you at home to think about on the inside and not say it out loud. What has God forgiven you for? So, what are the things that God has forgiven you for? Think about that. God forgives us all the time, and He helps us forgive our enemies. Forgiving other people doesn't mean we have to keep letting someone continue to hurt us physically or emotionally. But even if we keep our distance from someone who's hurting us, we can let go of that anger toward that person and forgive. Stephen was in a place where he had no way to get away from his enemies. He knew that he was going to die, and he could have died angry at them. But like Jesus, Stephen Stephen forgave his enemy. And letting go of that anger and bitterness that we have towards others sets us free. And sometimes it may change the hearts of those we've we've or sometimes it'll change the hearts of those who hurt us. And in I'm going to say this again. Letting go of our anger and bitterness towards others sets us free. Okay, letting all those emotions go sets us free, and sometimes it can change the hearts of those who hurt us. One of Stephen's enemies was Saul, aka Paul, a man who hurt a lot of Christians. And later, God changed Saul's heart. Now, this is Paul. I want to say Paul, but later God changed Paul's heart in a big, big way. And he traveled all over telling the people about Jesus. He even wrote most of the New Testament of our Bible. You never know when your forgiveness might help God change someone else's heart. And God has a plan that's bigger than any situation. Okay? Because God helps us forgive our enemies, and He can use that forgiveness in amazing ways. So let's learn to forgive each other and sometimes ourselves, when we get hurt by someone or we hurt someone else, we should learn to try to get along, and learn to forgive others like God has forgiven us, because God helps us forgive our enemies. All right, Kingdom Kids, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on Sunday. God loves you, and so do we.